Okay. Thank you very much for coming here today. I will just provide a very brief introduction and introduce our first speaker and our moderator here. So, just as a framing, recent experiences have highlighted the vulnerability of forests and the vulnerability of forest-based carbon sinks to disturbances including fire, pests, and the wind felling of trees. The frequency of these disturbances is very likely to increase with climate change. And still, many countries continue to address forests in forest adaptation and mitigation for forests in silos. And many countries count on forests for reaching their climate change mitigation targets. So we have identified a risk in terms of the achievement of these targets, and we are here at this event. We'll try to discuss these questions and identify ways of how to join mitigation and adaptation in terms of forestry and to break these silos. And with this, let me first introduce Pierre Brender, who will provide an introduction to this session. He's a policy officer in the Apollo unit in the UNFCCC Secretariat. And after Pierre, Maria Jose Sanz will directly take over for the moderation of this event. She's the scientific director of the Basque Center for Climate Change and has previously worked in different positions across the UNFCCC and the FAO on the governance of forest transitions. With that, I hand over to Pierre, and Maria will then take over directly after.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for having you today along the very nice panel you gathered for this event. So maybe as a starter, so Maria Jose asked me whether I could give some headline about how NDC so far highlighted adaptation in the forest sectors and how a synergy between adaptation and mitigation in forest addressed in NDCs. So for this introduction, I will focus on the new nationally determined contributions that have been submitted by parties between the 3rd January 2024 and the 30 September 2025, and that are captured in the NDC synthesis report that was published 3 weeks ago. So obviously, it's not possible to draw wide-ranging global-level conclusion on inference from that report, given the NDCs captured are capturing about 30% of total global emissions in 2019. However, there are nevertheless key lessons that emerge from that dataset that can be interesting to start the discussion today, and we have also panelists that can speak of other NDCs that were submitted more recently. So, in terms of adaptation, actually, first in terms of global picture, one interesting signal we see in the NDC submitted during that period since early January 2024 until September of this year is that they all go beyond mitigation, and adaptation and resilience are really featuring more prominently in those than what we saw before. So actually 70% of those new NDC include an adaptation component. And now if we look in more details at those 73%, actually 83% of those new NDC contain 83% contain a specific reference to forestry. So forestry is really highlighted in many of them. Example of adaptation measure included in the forest sectors are enhancing preparedness to and response to climate-induced pests and diseases, outbreaks to protect forest and forest resources, conducting training courses for forestry authorities and forest-dependent communities on climate-related risks, adaptation solution, and adaptive forest management practices. Now, when we look at the other part of the discussion today, which is the synergy between adaptation and mitigation, so of the 64 NDCs in that data set, the share of parties that identified in their adaptation component synergy between adaptation and mitigation is about half. So 53% of the previous, 53% of the previous NDC included this type of synergy. For those specific party, it's raised to up to 81% mentioning synergy between adaptation and mitigations. And this, I mean, it's not in all the cases, but it does include examples that cover forest-related issues. So typically, improving forest carbon stocks through restoration, afforestation, and conservation of native forest species is mentioned as an adaptation measures with mitigation co-benefits. And another example regarding the resilience of mangroves to reduce coastal floodings, but also obviously to increase carbon sequestration. Now, this does not tackle all the risks that go to the forest stocks and forest sinks. And if we go back to the mitigation component of the NDC, what we see is actually that forest and land use change, and so enhancing removals from forests is actually mentioned in that data set in 84% of these new NDCs. So as part mostly of an economy-wide mitigation target. And a total of 53% of those also include, in addition to an economy-wide target, LULUCF-specific targets, such as increasing carbon sequestration in the sectors, increasing woodlands and tree canopy cover to a given percentage. Finally, as we discussed also the risk on the sink, I think last dimension that is interesting to consider is that there is provision on how to address potential natural disturbances and specific ask to party to document that in the NDC from this one. And what we see is that 28% of party clarified how they intend to address emission and subsequent removals from natural disturbances, with 6% of party mentioning a specific country-specific approach in line with the IPCC guidance. So now I would like to give the floor to Maria Jose to start the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. Yeah, I mean, as you can see here, what is clear is that we have been doing a lot on forest in the last 25 years. We have been relying on forest. No se oye. Yeah. Okay. As we are all aware, no, the forests are being very prominent in the arena of climate change. In particular, because we had large expectations on the role of forest for helping us to mitigate climate change. But we are moving towards a new era, and NDCs are showing that too, as Pierre was indicating. Countries are also worried about the fact that the forests are vulnerable to climate change, and the climate is changing. So what I want is basically to bring the conversation around how now in the implementation of the actions in the forest sector and sectors related to forest, how we see that we need to proceed in order to increase the resilience that will guarantee de facto that they will play at least a reasonable role on also mitigating climate change. For that, I have Giacomo Grassi. Giacomo is working in the GRC in ISPRA. He is a well-known in the forest arena and the climate change. And you know a lot about the monitoring in Europe and how we can observe the reactions of forests also to impacts and the role of forests in the mitigation in the European Union. After that, we have also Margarita Gutierrez Arias. She's an independent consultant, but she knows a lot about Colombia. And Colombia has been a champion on early warning, for example, on forests for many, many years. So we will count on there. We also have Félix Romero Cañizares. He's the director of Fundación Biodiversidad. Fundación Biodiversidad is one of the reasons why we are all here in this pavilion. So thanks to them, we have this space. But it's also a very fundamental institution in Spain that helps to finance studies that are related to adaptation, and they did some interesting support to very interesting projects on forests as well. And finally, well, I have my friend Jan Ometo. He's the head of a strategic project division in IMPA, sorry. IMPA, right. And we have been working together for many years on how to use remote sensing in the best way, not only for monitoring the mitigation in forests, but also for understanding the disturbances and so on. And Brazil has also a very large program to track forests in all senses, I will say. So with this, I will start doing some questions to the participants. I will start with you, Giacomo. I guess because you are the closest to me, and I'm working in Spain, which is part of the European Union. I mean, we know in Europe, we know our forests relatively well, right? Every single country has a forest inventory that was put in place not only for carbon, but it was also for managing forests for a long time. And we have been noticing changes in forests. I mean, how do you see the current trends on disturbances in the European Union forest?
Thank you, Maria. And I would start with somehow where we are with the European Forest Sync in Europe, with the help of a few slides, and then address your question. The first one. It will write. So essentially, the first slide is about right there. Europe has a quite ambitious decarbonization plan. We already reached a reduction of emission of 37% compared to 1990. And our goal is to achieve greenhouse gas neutrality in 2050 with an expected significant contribution of forest. So far, until recently, forests were absorbing about 10% of total EU emission. Now, as I will show later, this percentage has decreased, but is in perspective with the decrease of emission from the other sector, the forest sink is expected in relative terms to increase its contribution. In particular, in 2050, essentially is expected to compensate most of the remaining emission. So the problem of the forest sink now in Europe is that it's facing okay, this was the first slide. So as you can see, this is the overall emission trend with a reduction more than 30% now. By the way, 2 weeks ago, Europe has decided to all member states to reach our emission target of minus 90% in 2040, which is 85 domestic and another 5% with international credits. So on the negative numbers, you see the land use and land use change in forestry, which is dominated by the forest sink, which is, as I said now, compensate about 7-8% of total emissions, but the relative importance is expected to increase in the future. This is what was expected. Next. The problem is that recent years we have faced an unprecedented decrease of the forest sink, which, as you know, have been already rather stable, around 400 million tons of CO2, compensating more than 10% of total EU emission, but has nearly halved, is decreased by about a third. You also see that the LULUCF sector, which is the orange, can be split between two main components. The green one is forest, which is the main determinant of the LULUCF sink, and then you have emission from other land uses, mainly cropland and grassland, which is slightly decreasing. But you see the main problem is that the forest sink has literally collapsed in the last few years. And these make it extremely challenging to reach the 2030 target for LULUCF, which foresee an increase of 42 million tons of sink compared to the historical period that we measure in 2016 to 18. So which are the reason of this unexpected collapse of the sink? The reason are various and difficult also to disentangle at country level, but is a mix of combined factor. So an increased harvest demand, but a lot of climate-related impacts, climate-related impact on forest growth, so drought stress let the forest grow less. Then the drought was also a trigger for events like widespread insect attacks in Central Europe. We have in Germany, in Czech Republic, unprecedented impact of insects, widespread impacts. And then also in Nordic country, also climate-related impacts. This has triggered salvage logging, so to the extent possible, this was where there has been extra logging because of that. And then last year we had also quite unprecedented impact of fires in western part of Iberian Peninsula. So a mix of factors where climate change plays a major role. Next one, the last one. So you see from this figure, from a recent paper, an estimated evolution of the damage due to natural disturbance. And you clearly see an upward trend for most of natural disturbance. In the last years, you had the bark beetles, which really boom in Central Europe. So the overall narrative that climate change is impacting more than we expected a few years ago. The main problem now are of the current situation that on the one hand, while we have a good system on average of forest inventory, in several countries this forest inventory do not provide very timely information. For example, the collapse of the sink that I showed in the previous slide became very evident this year, where a few member states updated data of the last 7-8 years. So let me allow an analogy. It's like if the climate policymaker are driving a car on a familiar road and they use a navigation system as the information of the greenhouse inventory, they say where we are. If the navigation system provides information which is accurate, but every 5 hours, is not very useful if you're driving on a familiar road. On top of that, this unexpected, unprecedented impact of climate change is like having someone that tried to grab the steering wheel. So we were thinking to have the full control of the sink through management and harvest, and we have seen that in some region the silvicultural list has become climate change. In some region you cannot harvest any tree unless it is salvage logging to save the impact of climate. So these two unprecedented impacts were really, the impact of climate change was really unprecedented. So what to do it? First of all, take these into account when designing new climate target. So this is my personal opinion, but given this uncertainty on the future impact of climate change, we did not expect last year, so we cannot also predict accurately the future. I think a wise strategy would be not to have single-year targets for this year, but we'd rather suggest maybe budget over multi-year period and possibly ranges. So taking into account the availability of LULUCF and the uncertainty related to climate impact. And then how to address to make forests more resilient. Clearly, scientific evidence says that as a general pattern, even if there is no one solution that fits all, there are a lot of local solutions, but general pattern is that this diversifying the species composition and the structure, so increasing the diversity, species structure diversity of forest, helps generally to make it more resilient. Locally, these may involve changing species or stimulating diversity. That means more harvest, which means in the short term, for a few decades, means even lowering the sink. So these should be taken into account when setting the target, because we have to balance various objectives. And resilience is an objective which should be prioritized, because a maladapted forest is a forest that will provide less ecosystem service in terms of wood production and sink. So enhancing forest resilience is a priority. Now European forests face the situation where it's like a short tablecloth with is pulled by several directions. Some say I want more sink, no, I want more diversity, I want more wood, but there is no, the key parameter should be prioritized is forest resilience, because if forest is not resilient, all will remain unhappy. This is the main challenge, to balance the future climate policy of Europe, to balance a realistic, ambitious but realistic target for forest with other ecosystem services that are expected from forest, and the resilience is a key to address this balance.
Thank you, Giacomo. I think that's very interesting, because we are coming from a region in the world where forest management was something very irregular. It was meant for production, so the inventories were designed actually to capture a very stable system that is predictable in a way. And that was adapted for monitoring GHG gases. That's why the inventories are not so yearly, let's say, regular, and we couldn't capture those dynamic changes which are fast now. So this is what has the good things of having a very good forest inventory, thinking on stability and management, but now we need to adapt. We need to adapt our systems of monitoring to implement adaptive measures, and maybe sometimes prioritize resilience rather than production. And I think in the country where we are in this pavilion, this is a priority. It's been a priority for a while, and we knew some of the disturbances very well. But even those knowledge we have on fires, for example, is changing completely. And this year was a very good example. That brings me back to Colombia and Margarita, because Colombia was very keen on having early warning systems since more than 10 years ago. And probably you don't have a perfect forest monitoring systems, but you are being also increasing your capacity due to the role of red flags, for example. So, I mean, how do you see that these combined things are really helping you now to understand how your forest will behave in the near future, and how you can actually provide means to adapt also in your forests while preserving also the other services?
Thank you, Maria Jose, and to our panelists and the public today. This is better? Hello? Okay. Thank you to all. Yes, the early warning system in Colombia that has been established officially since 2016, but that has been developed since many years before, have really actually changed some of the policy and also the implementation actions that we have developed, and also strengthen the capacity to merge mitigation options and the emission accounting and the deforestation accounting with really politics that tackle the vulnerability and also increase the capacity for analysis vulnerability in the regions. One of the main points that we have developed through that early warning system that has trimestral warnings is that we understood the drivers, and we understood where their sectoral responsibilities, and that how we can tackle different sectors and including illegal actors, and what are the needs that the people in the territories, in different territories with different kind of forests, we should address. These also allow to improve capacity in the territorial area, to to understand how the governance and how the different options of tackling those drivers will need to be differentiated, and where do they need more support from the national region, and where do we need to enhance the capacities of the local regions. The second point that was very important is that they enhance the coordination, the interinstitutional coordinations, because before we had these early warning systems, it was like accounting for trees is responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, and that's all. And with the system and with the socioeconomic analysis that the system provides, it also put this in the whole range of sectors that we have in Colombia, and understood that how making roads, how making ports, how the trade are very important actors in that drivers of deforestation. And finally, I think that it also supports the momentum that we had in that time, that we need to bring together mitigation and adaptation, that was led by a partner here, Rodrigo. At the moment, but that they were no silos, that we need to tackle together some of the issues, that we need to use the information that we had for forests to increase the models and improve the models of resilience. And now this is also seen even in the MBSAP, and how the relationship of this forestry monitoring is tackling how biodiversity needs to be addressed, and how and where do we need to establish a specific strategy to understand the multiple benefits of monitoring and understanding and improving the forestry around us.
Thank you. That's very interesting, Margarita, because basically what it means is that when we do an effort to monitor, we have to take on board as many possible factors as we can, and you should not decouple different elements, and obviously the effort is costly. I mean, a monitoring system is very costly, so it's important to make sure that it's as efficient as possible to address new challenges, And I think that's also interesting, because it's not only about carbon in the standing forest, it's about what other services the forest provide. One, which probably later Jan will talk about, is water. The preservation of the water cycle in some areas is also very important. So in essence, what I understand from you is that the combination of the early warning systems and the monitoring of standing forests and the changes in land use can actually be the basis for integrated mitigation and adaptation, while preserving the services that the forests are providing. That brings me back to my own country. And Felix, I mean, you are actually dealing with how to address needs that are expressed by different groups, that they believe that they can contribute with knowledge in order to, improve how we address the challenges of climate change, and that includes both mitigation and adaptation. I mean, what examples you can bring that the foundation has been experiencing, where actually these two things are coming together, or forests are becoming something which actually brings a broader spectrum of services, not only mitigating climate change, but also becoming more resilient and providing services.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's working, this mic. Okay, so well, thank you very much, Maria Jose. I would say, well, first of all, Biodiversity Foundation is a foundation from the Spanish government, from the Ministry of Ecological Transition. So our main focus is basically to try to put in place enough funding for ensuring a full alignment with the European strategies on forestry and restoration, as well as a commitment from the Spanish government. And in the context of Spanish forests, I think today the main goal is to try to increase resilience, because we have a key driver, which is really putting under risk all the work that the forestry sector and forest policy has done along several decades in Spain, and this is forest fires. So we have a very clear example this year, even though we know in the last 30 years that this would be happening. I mean, from more than 20 years, science and the analysis of data demonstrate that forest fires were going to go larger. those forest fires that we are not able to extinguish in very early moment, will we go to larger hectares of burned territory? And this is connected also to the, not only from an ecological problem that we have, because a very important part of our area is connected to monocultive reforestation. So there is a problem of adaptation. We need to diversify our forests into a more resilient diversity inside the forest management unit, as well as in also inside the whole land territory planning. So how also we mix our forests with agriculture areas, and how can also ensure that planning at a rural development, at rural level in a region is resilient enough as to make sure that a forest fire doesn't run for thousands of hectares altogether. So with that focus and understanding also that Spain is suffering a very important problem of land abandon, also because the migration from rural areas into the cities since the last 70 years, Biodiversity has put between 2021 and 2023 funds in more than 70 projects across Spain to make sure that we increase forest management, because we have a key problem of forest abandon. People move from rural areas into the cities. They forgot even if they were owners of forest. Maybe our grandparents had a piece of forest in a local community, but I don't even know where is that. So we have a problem of cadastre also, identifying who is the owner of that. And also, if you don't know who is the owner, how can you really put in place policies engaging people? So focusing on local participation, governance with local communities, engaging forest owners and helping them to recognize that they are forest owners, that they need to do something with their land, and helping all of them with experts, with the forest engineers, with the local authorities, with the regions, with the forest services, to put forward, again, a model of bioeconomy based on natural-based solution and forest management, to make sure that part of the rural economy is based on forest, but also at the same time ensuring that ecosystem services are part of the equation. Because when you look into countries like Spain, and basically all the countries in the Mediterranean area, where productivity in forest doesn't cover enough the whole expenses that you need to put in place to ensure sustainable forest management, and therefore this means that you need to compensate from some way the whole services that nature is providing to the society, like the contribution to the water cycle, the carbon storage, biodiversity. Necessarily, we need to look on how can we identify new formulas, methodologies, which are credible, which are transparent, to make sure that we can put money also into the sound forest management that ensures that the forest is there, that ensures that the forest is adapting to a new reality within the climate change context, and that ensure that this forest is providing services to the society. So therefore today, I would like to highlight that these 70 projects are very much focused on creating capacity building for new forest vision, including this natural capital accountability in parallel to the economics, and also trying to put examples across the country to reinforce the policies, the forest policies that we already have in Spain, the national strategy on forests, where it is said that we need to move forward with ecosystem services, with payment for ecosystem services, ensuring governance, legality, nature protection, conservation, but essentially we need to make sure that economically this works. And economically works means not only that somebody is going to make a kill with the forest. I mean, it's not that we are looking for having a speculation process with forests. It's just to make sure that there is not a loss of profit, and then if I don't gain enough, I abandon my forest and it is there. So many of the projects are there, and many of them are working on creating these models of group forest managers, creating forest management plans, putting ecosystem services in the formula, and then trying to create a payment for ecosystem services model where also private sector could contribute with corporate social responsibility contributions to that. All of this based on science with works that we are doing with organizations like BC3 in Spain, like for example the ERIC report, where we are also identifying which kind of challenges are facing our forests in terms of adaptation, biodiversity, and all these elements that we are discussing here today.
Thank you, Felix. That's very interesting. You mentioned a couple of things that I think it merit to be expanded, no? I mean, how we ensure that we can value the services of forest in a more holistic manner. Now you mentioned natural capital accounts, which is something that the countries are starting to address. No? The UN in 2022 launched the new standards for accounting ecosystem services, which is the basis for the natural capital accounts that they are piloting now. And indeed, I will do a little bit of propaganda, but the technology behind the natural capital accounts is in my institution. We have an alliance with the UN statistics to pilot that. And I think this is a very interesting approach, also because the monitoring becomes extremely important for the accounts. So it's not that you have to start a new avenue to produce the information needed for the natural capital accounts. You can based on what is being done so far. And fortunately, the information on forests has high quality. Some will need to adapt regularity and so on, like the European countries probably need to be more dynamic. Some others may need to improve. But at the very end, you have this information there. So we can start with the forest accounts in a very easy manner, no? And that brings me also to the fact that the new technologies are becoming extremely critical. Remote sensing is a very fundamental tool those days. Jan, you're an expert on those, and you have a long career in the system that Brazil created for tracking forests, for monitoring forests. Brazil is a huge country, so it is a real challenge. But so far, I mean, we had discussions previously about sustainable forest management in Brazil, how monitoring can help on that. What is the status that you have now, and how you combine that with the fact that Brazil also has a long tradition to follow fluxes in forests to understand actually the short-term changes?
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Maria. I hope you're hearing me. Like this, right? Okay. So I think I should take this off. Otherwise, I don't hear me, which is. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and sharing the table at, old and new friends. So we are the edge of the Amazon, in fact. And if we look east, there are about 7 million square kilometers of forest and no forest, and social dynamic, very intense. And one aspect that's becoming critical is the associated impact in the forest system. So to this region we're looking, Colombia also, we're looking up there. We are faced incremental change in the system, and most in a negative way. Some in a positive way, but most in a negative way. So how to capture that? I think that's a big challenge. So I had a little presentation, but I didn't have time to send, and I almost didn't have time to arrive here because I was in another place. So by remote sensing, as you were saying, Maria, so we're monitoring deforestation in this region here. And the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil, which is a branch of the Ministry of Science and Technology, and feeds also the National Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory with its data. So we've been monitoring this region since late 80s consistently. There are measurements from before that, but from late 80s, it's a yearly measurements. And we see a big fluctuation, which is a lot associated to different governments, associated to different perspectives. So when you see the pressure on deforestation also obviously fluctuates in different perspectives. And what that happened. So that's a big issue in terms of emission itself. We know forest carbon and also by reducing the sinks. I'm surprised this what Jack was saying in terms of losing the strength of the sink on European forests. So, but we see a decreased trend in this past years. But that has already deforested almost 20% of the whole region in Brazil. But another important thing that we're being able to capture more precise, not more precise, but more consistent with the remote sensing is forest degradation. So just to have an idea, fire is part of that. Fire in this region is not a natural process. It is essentially anthropogenic. Someone goes or in a side pasture or for any reasons, but it's essentially anthropogenic. It's changing a little bit. Talking to some indigenous communities, they're saying that there are lightning happening without rain already. They are seeing that. And I think those are very trustable information. So, but what we're seeing, so just to have an idea, in 2024, in the Brazilian region of the Amazon, we had more than 130,000 active fires in the Amazon region. So this is a degradation element. On top of that, what is going on is that the persistent drought is leading to a drier system, so the water level in certain regions of the Amazon is going down and is not coming back to its original state in the next rainy season because of the persistent drought. And the relative humidity is decreasing a little bit in some regions. So it's a combined drought. So how we capture that? That's very complicated in terms of remote sensing. So what the inventory, for example, tries to not account, but at least monitor and report that this is happening. And we need more information to be able to, to see how much the sink we're losing the sink, what the strength of the sink is being lost. And that's a very important component of the Brazilian inventory because 70% of our emissions are land use. So was not me, but was loud. Yeah, but yeah. So 70%, 40% of our emissions are forest related, deforestation, basically. But degradation is not there yet. But I think it's the next step. So we report, but we still don't monitor. We don't account for the fires because the regrowth of the forest is still a big debate. So I think Europe has a long history of understanding how the systems recover from an impact. In the Amazon, that's not as trivial, but that's another issue. But there's some very new information coming out, and I don't think Aragão is here, but they're doing a great work on connecting two things. Actually connecting biodiversity, carbon, and resilience. So when you find a higher biodiverse forest with a more structured forest that holds more carbon, it's showing to be a more resilient to these aspects. Up to now, it's not projected. So if we project the climate change with those aspects, we certainly might not have the same results. But even in the Amazon region, and there's another work interesting by a guy called Paulo Brando, that they map resilience by sub-region of the Amazon, bringing these ecological aspects of that. So the dialogue of this with remote sensing nowadays, we do very well with forest structure. We do very well deforestation for sure, because it's kind of easy, you have a green carpet, then you don't have it anymore, and fires as well. So I think we're moving on. There's opportunities with the new European satellite, the biomass, which is, it might be an interesting perspective in terms of a radar quantification. So technology might help, but we definitely in the perspective of the forest, the this the relation ecological climate connection, we need to really understand and get that on the table. How that's going to arrive to the inventory, I think this is the methodology needs to be more clarifying how that. Just a last point, coming back to what Chris was saying, is that a lot of the forest here, there is no ownership. So the land tenure is a huge issue. When you don't have a strong fiscal connection of that piece of land, it's much more vulnerable to to actions or to crazy politics or whatever. This is it's a challenge that go for the clear understanding of the ecological processing, considering the climate change, and the connection with the whole governance and social systems.
Thank you, Jan. I mean, it has been a quite an interesting diversity here because in Europe we have a forest mass that was growing tremendously after the Second World War with lots of monoculture plantations. In the tropical countries you have standing forests to protect and the climate is changing, right? And it's not only about carbon. In Spain it's also about water. In the Amazon it's also about water. So my question, and you can answer in half a minute, is we have different circumstances, but at the very end we have the same goal. How much important or how more leverage you give to protect the forest we have, or to restore or to recover forest area that was lost? I mean, how you will see the balance in between the two if I will have to, if I'm short in resources and I don't know? I mean, I will give you an example in my country. My country has the Corco forest. The Corco forest is a relict forest where when the climate was much more humid. So when I lose a Corco forest, I don't have any more the climate because the forest itself provides the climatic conditions for survival. So if I lost it, it's very difficult to recover. I mean, how do you see this balance? I mean, should we try to find a balance both? Should we protect the standing forest, and is this a priority? In the circumstances that you are living, actually, what you will be the priority? And if it's any other service that you think that in the countries where you are more familiar with is also a priority, not only the carbon. Jacob.
As said, so far there have been different priorities depending on the stakeholder you talk to. Those that rely on the forest industry sees that bioeconomy can contribute also to climate change through durable wood products, replacing fossil fuel and doing material and energy substitution. Those dealing with climate change know that the LULUCF sink is somehow not compatible with the sustained increased year after year of the harvest demand. So often I'm asked, okay, but since there are trade-offs between wood demand and then LULUCF, which should be the priorities? I would say no one of the two. As I said before, probably the priority should be resilience, because without resilience, both stakeholders will remain disappointed. Investing in more resilience allow to try to find locally a balance between the various stakeholders and the various needs somehow.
Margarita?
That's a very difficult question. And I think that if we can see it from NDC's perspective, the priority is avoid deforestation for our country because this is the main source of emissions. But at the same time, for achieving the goals of adaptation and the economical progress that we want, restoring the lands that we have, it's very critical. And we have both a strategy of avoiding deforestation and a strategy of restoration with priority areas. And one thing that we have made, and it was very important in the last 5 years, is that we established the line of where the rural area starts and when the white area begins. And in the middle of that area, we need to combine both strategies. And we need to tackle how to avoid deforestation at the same time that we restore the forest that we have. And within the agricultural area, we need to prioritize how to maintain the relicts of forest that we have, but we also have another strategy of we cannot lose the area that we have for forest. So I think that we need to a comprehensive approach that try to bring us both. And of course, in a country like Colombia, it depends on the regional and the lands and the territories, because in the Amazon, our priority is not to lose the Amazon. In the Sierra Nevada Santa Marta, who have people here, the priorities need to be tackled on how the forestal governance enhance their capacities to live well, but also to restore the nature and the sacred nature that they have in their lands.
In the case of Spain, and having into mind that ecological restoration is a priority and planting trees, it is always important. But here I think it is very important also to understand this. In the context of Spain, planting trees is more important for recovering ecological cycles and connectivity than for absorbing CO2 itself. Because the challenge it is in maintaining the forests that we already have, which are basically in this land abandon situation that I said before. So the priority is making sure that we don't get burned our forests. And for that, it is more important to think in how can we really put in value the carbon which would be avoided if we really manage our forests well, than planting trees to increase carbon credits or to get money in the territory because I'm planting trees. So I would say we need to plant in trees if we have a restoration project, but we need to make sure that we manage our forests to avoid carbon again in the atmosphere after decades or centuries of having forests in, I would say now, in not the best conditions. So that would be the focus that we really need to highlight in countries like, I think it is in all Mediterranean areas, and we can translate this also in other parts of the world with these semi-arid conditions. And for Spain, it's clearly this, the effort that we need to do, balancing, restoration, but basically is working with what we have already to do not contribute more to climate change by losing carbon.
Thanks, Felix. We're in a region that forest is really critical. So we know here that a fund, the TFFF, was launched by the Brazilian government, in fact, to try resource to keep forests. So that's one aspect. And RED is an important mechanism in this part of the world. And still, dialoguing with the effective implementation, but the jurisdiction of RED is something that is really becoming something critical. So forest conservation is an issue. It's an economic issue, and it's a strategic issue, and is, I would say that, in my perspective, is an ecological and ethical issue. The other point, if I may, Maria, is that there is a lot of degraded land in Brazil. And the opportunity for forest restoration is really big. On that context of forest restoration, there are secondary forests that it does happen a lot because people extract the important wood or whatever the economic interest in on that and just abandon that. And sometimes does implement a pasture with a low productivity and the forest starts coming back. So the area of secondary vegetation is not negligible. It's really important. So this is one strategy. And the other strategy is the effective restoration. So there is several events around here that banks are launching the arch of restoration instead of arch of deforestation in Brazil. So I think it goes in those two directions, Maria. To me, conservation is really critical, but we need a strategy for that. So how economy get into that perspective? How did the users of the forest get into that? We're looking to the Amazon, that's one perspective, but the other forests, the dry region forest in Brazil, or other forests that are under pressure as well, they have different perspectives. So I think that those, for the forest sector in Brazil, I see that those strategies have to go along. Trying to find the right mechanisms, trying to engage, and to have, I would say, legislation or to have effective, for natural forests, we do have an interesting forest code. For second forest, we have nothing. So if anyone wants to deforest second forest, they can deforest. So, and that's an opportunity to, just recover the carbon that's been lost. So it goes a little bit on that. So the governance a little bit, but those two elements with all the funding that might be available, and those are, I would say that those are the whole environment in that perspective.
So, well, I guess both are necessary, but they need to be implemented strategically, right? Because sometimes they also are synergies between conservation and restoration. You can actually be more keen on that your forest will be preserved if you do the restoration in the right areas. So I think that's the conclusion, and that obviously has to be seen in each of the contexts. Not all the contexts are the same. And adaptation is a must. So considering resiliency is a must. We cannot afford doing anything in forests now without thinking that they need to become more resilient. So, I mean, thank you very much to all of you. It was I learned a lot, by the way, so thanks a lot. And well, let's see we manage to make our forests more resilient, and therefore they will serve for other services as well. Thank you very much.